I think being naive in a particular domain can maybe be the best gift you can give yourself.
Welcome to the Craft Podcast, where we interview experts in various fields to learn about their disciplines and how they strive towards mastery. We love talking to people who are passionate enough to master something of these craftspeople our whole lives, and want to share those conversations with others. The interviews are to the point, informative, and fun. You will love them all. And please be sure to subscribe to our channel and click the like button if you love our interviews. And let's get right into it.
Thanks, Michael. Today we have Paul Canetti, and Paul is a product designer, an expert. He's founded several and exited successfully several companies, including MAZ, which I interned for long ago. And he's consulted with brands as wide-ranging as TikTok, L'Oreal, General Electric, and Citigroup. Paul also teaches at Columbia Business School, lecturing on a wide range of topics around product management and strategy across tech industries. And on top of all that, he's building up his own media house, or shall I say empire, with newsletters, podcasts, and online courses. So he's a very experienced entrepreneur. He's a master in several of his disciplines, and we're honored to have him on the show. Paul, welcome to the Craft Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for the kind intro.
Yeah, well, we mentioned your product expertise. So let's kick it off with that. And a first question for you, since we like to go deep on this podcast, is how would you describe your own approach to product development and strategy? And how is it distinct from other well-known approaches?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, a lot of the well-known approaches are also good. I think it's about, it's funny, obviously, I teach this subject in a very academic setting, which is basically the least true thing about what I'm teaching is simply the fact that it exists in academia at all, because unlike maybe other things that you sort of learn in school and then just sort of repeat on the job, this is really about taking sort of the formal ideals of product strategy and product management, and then being able to sort of I don't like the word, but I can't think of a better one, like synthesize all of these different things that you've learned in this very sort of like process-oriented way. First you do this, then you do this, then you do this. Ta-da, product strategy.
Right.
On the ground, it doesn't actually feel like that. But if I had to really sort of zero in on something that I think is unique to my approach to product and that I try to instill into my students, it's what I call taste. And, most product management courses will teach you about, sort of the technical piece of the house. Like, how does the stuff actually get made, and who are the different people on a software engineering team, and how to talk to them, stakeholder management, how to deal with your boss and their boss's boss, and the people from marketing and legal, and all of these sort of things. And that's all totally true. But most of these other programs I found overlook the thing that makes a great product person great, which is that they actually know the difference between a good product and a not good product. And that's not something you can, sort of just refilter your spreadsheet and get the answer on. Right. It's much more akin to an art than a science. Like, it's more like being a music producer or a movie director or something, where it's like, I have a vision of how this is going to go. I'm not the actor. I'm not the set designer. I'm not even the screenwriter, but I'm going to put all these pieces together in a way that I know is going to hit the right notes emotionally and commercially to ultimately create a great movie or a great record or a great whatever or a great product. And so taste is the thing that it's also the hardest to teach. It's the hardest, skill. If you want to, people with great taste are going to have a very successful product career.
Right. And how did you come to that realization? Was there a moment that encapsulated it for you where it was like you realize it's not there's no textbook there's no textbook that could teach this?
Yeah, I mean, probably it's because I didn't study it in school and I didn't ever read a textbook. I've still never read a textbook. You know what I mean?
Lucky.
And so
lucky man.
I came into product development through, just through the job, like purely through trial and error and trying different things and not knowing enough to not try. I think being naive in a particular domain can maybe be the best gift you can give yourself. I didn't know anything about how software gets built. I did come up. My dad was a graphic designer, an industrial designer, having nothing to do with software, but I had a very strong sense of design, and that was sort of how I got into it. But to me, it was like, well, this is what it's supposed to be like. How can we make it like this? And then, sometimes when you're working with an engineering team and their first reaction is like, well, we can't do that. I'm like, well, what if we could? How would you do it then? And that's like, oh, well, in that case, and all of a sudden you're off to the races. So yeah, to me, and again, it's not even something you can take credit for. I feel like I just have taste inherently, and I actually started my whole journey from there.
Right.
This is the thing that I learn how to make it, as opposed to I know how to make stuff. Now, what should I make? I came at it the other way.
Right. But then, I mean, then that would suggest that in your case, actually, the textbooky stuff maybe would have been helpful, but it sounds like you just never went down that direction.
Yeah, I mean, part of that I think is my age, in that there were no product management courses or UX courses or whatever when I was in school, period. You couldn't graduate with a degree in entrepreneurship, or a lot of the programs that exist today just didn't exist. So that wasn't really computer science, I guess, but
right.
I suck at coding. I'm really, really, really bad at it, and I hate it, and I think it's boring. And so I tried, it multiple times in my life. In high school, this was the early days of the web, late 90s, just to date myself. And I was one of the only two kids in my school that were learning about early website development. And the other kid was Simon Baumer, who went on to be the co-founder of MAZ with me and all my other endeavors. And so the two of us started our journey really early and realized pretty quickly, you're really good at coding. I'm really good at figuring out what we should code. Let's team up, because these are two different things. What to build and how to build it are two different things.
Yeah. Are there any particular stories or examples of working with Simon where that really came out? I don't know, a feature development experience you could share that would help us all on our journeys to finding the right Paul or Simon for us?
Yeah, well, I think, from there, obviously, I'm very lucky in that I met many, many more amazing engineers over my career. that became, a, an army of Simons, because different people have different expertise. But like, I remember we had a feature early on at MAZ that was our first sort of like hit, if you will. Like, it's the thing we got a bunch of press about and everyone was sort of buzzing about. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, like let's do more things like that. And it was this feature called clippings, where you could cut out a section of the screen and share it on social media, which of course today we do all the time. It's like a partial screenshot. But at this time, there was no OS level screenshotting, and there was no share sheet, like where you press the share button and all those share options come up. Like, those things didn't exist on mobile devices at the time. And so again, we sort of recognized there was this need, or this sort of hidden desire, for people to cut out just a sentence or just a partial piece of the screen and then share it. But there wasn't a way to do that. And so I wanted to do it. But of course, at first blush, everyone I talked to, including Simon, I'm sure, was like, well, yeah, that would be cool, but you can't do it. That's why it doesn't exist. It's like, well, let's really like dig in there. And this is, I think, what you're getting to around, like, wouldn't knowing whatever's in the textbook be helpful? Eventually, you have to understand the materials you're working with. Like, if we were doing physical manufacturing, you have to start to understand how the sausage actually gets made, because you can actually empower your more technical counterparts to think creatively about how to sort of string things together to make it work. And long story short, we were able to find this way to implement things, not at sort of the app level, but almost intercepting the signal, if you will, between the operating side view of the screen and take a screenshot. So for like within an application, you can't really do it. From the operating system, you can, but obviously we don't have access to the operating system. Well, is there any sort of fancy footwork we can do that's somewhere, in no man's land between these two? And if I try to explain it in more detail, I'll botch it. But like, that was through a lot of back and forth with our engineering team to figure out, like, this is what we want to achieve. Let's really, really think outside the box on how we could achieve that. And I think that's sort of what I was referring to with taste, where it's like, you can't just accept sort of what is. You have to think about like what you want, and then sort of really push things to their boundary to see, like, well, is this achievable somehow, some way?
Right.
And usually that's a back and forth. It doesn't come out the way you imagined it, but you sort of are moving in that direction.
Yeah. How do you get to the point? Because I can imagine, maybe the engineering team will come back and say it's not possible because of X, Y, and Z. How do you come to the point where you feel like you've hit the boundary? If you don't have all the
when
technical knowledge, you
start believing them,
right?
Yeah, it's like it's like converting to Judaism. Like, you knock on the rabbi's door and they say no, and then you knock again and they say no, and then on the third time they say come in.
Yeah.
And engineers are like too, and it's not just them. I think it's just human nature, whatever you're good at and used to doing. If someone comes in and says, hey, like, could we do it some other way? You're like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, it's a visceral sort of tightening.
Right.
And what you need to do as a product manager and a product leader is sort of like get everyone to loosen up a little bit and feel safe to sort of experiment and throw out some of the crazier concepts that on the face of it seem like they will fail. But it's kind of like, oh, well, that's kind of interesting. What if we did that. And the other thing, and I'm sure we'll get into this, but like it's also a lot of great ideas are just sort of floating in the wind, and you almost have to have like your antenna up, and I think that's about immersing yourself in the community of makers that are making the same sorts of things that you're interested in making. And so it's not just of like externally as well, and you're sort of just taking all of those things come together. So you don't want to limit yourself just to the conversation within your team. And I find that a lot when I work with these big corporations, especially. I'm like, when's the last time you talked to someone who works in product, not at your company? And they're like, before I started working here,
right,
8 years ago. And I'm like, okay, you got to get out more, because I do think a lot of that loosening can come simply by seeing how other people do it,
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And then I guess, going deeper into that loosening bit, and then we'll start talking a little bit about your entrepreneurship experiences. Is how do you structure those discussions? Like, do you have a process? Like, is it a big meeting where you bring everybody around a whiteboard, or is it many one-on-one discussions with each of the engineers, and you draw out like unique insights, or is it some kind of mix of both, or is it maybe not as structured as I might imagine?
When I'm doing it well, there is a semi formula that works. When I'm doing it badly, I'm not bringing everybody along for the ride, and in the end, that takes longer. So the right way to do it is to have a bunch of individual conversations, and that's half about learning and half about like doing inception to other people so that they feel like they are actually creating your ideas.
Right.
It's much easier to sell you on an idea if you think that you're selling it. Right.
For sure.
And so it's not that I have all the answers in advance, but through a series of conversations, as you start to circle themes, instead of just saying like, I got it, everybody come in this conference room or this Zoom, like I figured it out, we're good. That doesn't usually work. Instead, it's sort of as you start to, as the tipping point arrives where you're moving from sort of fact finding into solution mode, it's helping people arrive at a similar conclusion on their own by sort of prompting them. And if your solution really is right and logical, it should be relative. Yes, you believe B is true. Okay, well, if A and B, and then they're like, wait, what about C? And you're like, oh my, yes, C could work. And it's like, of course, that's why we're having this conversation. I'm trying to get you to C.
Right.
But everybody in the room, when you present your vision for C, it might not be exactly what each person had in mind, but it's close enough that everyone's sort of swimming in the same direction. And I think that can be really, really effective. And so I say that I don't always do it that way because that's harder and longer and more cumbersome to include everybody in the process. The other benefit to doing it that way is C might be wrong. Like you might discover through those conversations, like, am I allowed to curse on this podcast?
Yeah, it's fine.
I don't know. Kids at home. But like, it's like, oh shit, I was wrong. Like I am trying to convince you of this thing, but actually what you just said completely blew this up for me.
Right.
And I think it's really important to recognize when that happens and to give other people credit there, especially publicly with the team, and to sort of say, like, I was going down this road. I talked to Michael, blew my mind, and we're not doing C. We should do D. And it's like, and it has to be that the best ideas win, not your ideas win.